Yellow Pencroft Farm, Chapter 14, page 205, where there's a will. Dad put down his coffee cup and sent a disbelieving look across the breakfast table. I never thought I'd hear you actually plead to go to school, Lars. But we're setting up for Colonial Day. It's on Monday. Colonial Day? Dad looked puzzled. Mom clicked her tongue. He told you about it, Eric. It's a colonial reenactment thing. The kids are even supposed to go by a colonial name to help them get the feel of the era. What name are you going to use, Lars? Dad asked, picking up his cup again. Ebenezer, like Judge Banks. I know, Mom chimed in. How about George? Your ancestor's name and your middle name, as Aunt Cass kept reminding us. Dad scoffed. It's not old-fashioned enough. How about Ezekiel? Sounds like a big wheel, or Ichabod, as in crane. What about George, as in Washington? Mom retorted. For Pete's sake, you guys give me a break. I broke in laughing. I'll think of something. Pete. Now there's a good name, Mom mused. Reminds me that we ought to give your brother a call. Poor Peter, I said. He missed out on a lot, having to stay in Minnesota. Aunt Cass and everything. Mom came over and gave me a hug. I just had to do that. I'm so proud of you, Lars, she said. Seems like a couple of centuries ago you arrived here, L. George. You've grown up a lot since then. Dad cleared his throat. So what else is going to happen at this Colonial Day? Oh, crafts and stuff, I replied. By the way, we're having a museum at school, Mom. Can I take the riddle? The what? Oh, you mean that old sieve. Sure, you can take whatever you want. Too bad we can't find the cup and ball. That would be a nice museum piece. Mom paused, then, with a wry smile, said, It'd be nice to find the will, too. My face must have mirrored my worry about the missing will, because after a quick glance at me, Mom went on, Cheer up, Lars. By tomorrow, you won't be contagious anymore, and maybe you'll feel up to going out. Could we go to Valley Forge? I asked eagerly. I feel fine. Sure, call up a friend. My eagerness faded some. I don't know anybody's number. We know Pat's. Look, I'll call her up and see if she'd like to go to Valley Forge with you tomorrow, Mom said. I regarded this plan with mixed feelings, but Mom soon came back to report that it was all set. And guess what? She added. Pat's going to pick you up on her horse. There are riding trails at Valley Forge. Horseback? Geez, I don't know. I remembered how I disgraced myself at camp. Still, riding to Valley Forge sounded like fun. I hoped I could stay in the saddle that far. Saturday morning turned out to be bright, sunny, and unseasonably warm. As I waited outside for Pat, I remembered how Aunt Cass had bamboozled me into thinking Pat was a boy. I was still smiling at this memory when Pat came cantering up the drive. Her white horse had unexpectedly blue eyes. To cover up the awkwardness I felt, I asked Pat about them. She laughed. In a horse, they're called glass eyes. Father got her for me because he said blue eyes run in our family. Except for me. I guess I got brown eyes from that great whatever Grammy whose picture is on my wall. Dad says I take after her, that we're as alike as two peas in a pod. I made a face. Please don't mention peas. Oh, you hate them too? Well, I hate to tell you, but we grow bumper crops of them in our garden. So did Cass. I wonder if Aunt Cass grew corn in her garden. I wonder. I know. Mom brought out a brown paper bag. A snack, she said. I took it from her and peeked inside. Oh, good, pasties. Aunt Cass used to make those for me, Pat said. I haven't had any since she died. Those are from her recipe, Mom said. I'll give you a copy if you like, to remember her by. I handed Pat the bag and gingerly climbed up behind her. Take it easy, Mom said. Lars isn't much of a horseman. Don't worry, Mrs. Olson. I'm a careful driver, Pat joked and chirruped the horse down the drive. At first, as we jounced along Seek No Further Pike, I was too nervous to say much. And Pat told me it was a family tradition to name horses after flowers. so her mare was called Petunia. It seemed silly to be intimidated by a horse named Petunia. And soon Pat and I were talking about all kinds of things. Pat pointing out the sights and me telling her some of the Valley Forge stuff I'd picked up from Geordie. Of course, I didn't reveal my source of information. As we talked, I was more and more tempted to tell her my secret. But how could I explain it without her thinking I was either lying or crazy? Finally, I said a little stiffly, "You know, before we got to Pencroft Farm, Mom kidded around about it being haunted." Pat replied, "Yeah, Aunt Cass hinted about that once in a while. Of course, she loved to bamboozle kids." I know, I said, laughing a little nervously. Pat went on, "I could almost believe it was haunted sometimes, especially—" Petunia, startled by a passing car, jumped sideways, and for a little while we were too busy holding on to talk. After the horse settled back into her easy gait, I took up the subject again, as casually as I could. "What were you saying about almost believing Pencroft is haunted, especially—" Pat chuckled. "Oh, yes, especially when Cass played that creepy Captain Nemo piece on our organ. With the stops pulled out and the wind right, we could hear it at Blackberry Hill. Okay, Lars, here's the turnoff for the park. I just love this part, going through the covered bridge over Valley Creek." Must be new, I thought, remembering that Geordie and Sandy had forded the creek. Then as we clattered over the bridge, I couldn't help comparing it with the other one, where I'd first seen Geordie. Thought gave me the nerve to blurt out, "Pat, do you believe in ghosts?" When I come to Valley Forge, I do a little. There's something special about a spot where real people suffered and died. Not ghosts exactly, just a feeling. And about 3,000 of the people who camped here with Washington died. I thought about Will and how close he'd come to death and felt too much to speak. As we wound our way up the long hill to the right, Pat said over her shoulder, "Oh, look, Lars, don't expect this to be very dramatic. There wasn't any battle fought here, you know. Lots of people are disappointed when they find that out." "But there was a battle," I said. "Just keeping the army together for the whole winter was a battle." "Hey, look, there's some of the huts. I can't believe they're still here." "Hate to tell you, Lars, but they're all reconstructions," she said apologetically. "These huts are supposed to be where Wayne's brigade was. Those were guys from Pennsylvania." "I knew that," I said, as if joking, though underneath I was feeling more and more excited. "Let's stop and take a look." We slid off Petunia and tied her up, then went into one of the huts. It was so like what Geordie had described that I could almost see Will lying on the rough bunk, shivering on filthy straw. Pat looked at me curiously. "See any ghosts in here, Lars?" A shudder ran over me. "Sort of. Memories, anyway." "Memories? I thought you'd never been here before." "Let's go to the museum," I said hastily. We climbed back on Petunia and trotted along the road that marked the outer defenses. As we went, I suddenly had the oddest feeling that Petunia was following Buttercup's hoofprints, carrying Geordie and Sandy to Valley Forge to help Will. Parking Petunia below the museum, we went inside. There we found display cases full of artifacts from the Revolution, like the ones at the Brandywine Museum. Of course, Pat had been there so much she had favorite things to show me and lots to say, especially about what women did at Valley Forge. Yep, not only did Mrs. Washington and other officers' wives come here, but so did lots of other women whose husbands were here. They nursed the sick, washed clothes, and cooked. I wonder if our ancestors were here too. I doubt it. In his portrait, old George looks like a guy who wouldn't do anything that would mess up his ruffled shirt. Pat indignantly started to argue, but another exhibit caught her eye. I never noticed this display before. It's about that German guy, von Steuben, who taught the Americans to march and maneuver. Apparently, he was a phony. Instead of being some big shot with the Prussian army, he was really only a captain and hadn't done any soldiering for years. Get this. This is that Benjamin Franklin helped fake the guy's papers so Congress would accept his help. Let me see that. I leaned over to read the text aloud. His title was false, but his skill was not. That's funny, I muttered. He never said anything about a phony title. Who? Pat asked, giving me a quizzical look. Huh. Oh, nothing. I quickly turned back to the display and read on. So at the end of the winter of Valley Forge, the Americans had well-trained soldiers and official French support. It made all the difference. Uneasy that I had said too much, I went over to another case and peered at its contents. Pat came up beside me. Look at those, she said, pointing at some leaden dice. They must have gambled to pass the time. Oh, no, that was against Washington's rules, I muttered, remembering the backs striped in punishment for gambling. Well, looks like somebody was breaking the rules, Pat said. Then she read, failure to use the vaults will be punished by 5 lashes. What the heck does that mean? The vaults were the latrines, I whispered, blushing. Pat looked at me with some new respect, mixed with embarrassment. How do you know all this stuff? You know what? I think you're a phony yourself, L. George Olafson. A phony? I echoed weakly. Pat grinned. Aunt Cass told me she'd heard you were terrible at history, not the least bit interested. And all the time, you were as crazy about history as I am. You phony. Well, not quite all the time, I admitted modestly, grinning back at her. Suddenly it seemed okay that she wasn't a Patrick. We climbed back on Petunia, in perfect charity with one another, as Geordie would say, and rode across the grand parade to Washington's headquarters. There I saw the woefully short bed upon which the tall general had slept sitting up, and there I could almost see Sandy holding yarn for Lady Washington to wind. Lapdog, I muttered. Huh? Oh, nothing. Hey, want to skip rocks? Ducks and drakes, she teased. Sure. We went down to the river. This time I did outskip her, and soon I was telling her all about the shad running up the Schuylkill that had helped feed the soldiers. Luckily, instead of piquing her curiosity, it whetted her appetite. I'm starving, just like the previous visitors. I shouldn't really joke about it, I suppose. Sounds pretty awful. Come on, let's eat these pasties, I said. As we whipped down the pasties, we heard some carillon bells. Pat said they were from the Washington Memorial Chapel, and we rode up to investigate. The music was over by the time we arrived, but we decided to look around anyway. As we started down the hallway of the chapel, a familiar voice made me grab Pat's hand and pull her behind a column. Lars, what are you doing? She spluttered. Mr. Owens. We peeked around the column. He was standing just inside the entrance to a small private museum. In his arms was a large green drum with a golden eagle painted on his side. I'm sorry to take back my ancestors' drum after it's been here so long, Mr. Owens was saying, but I'll be opening my own museum soon, and I must get everything together. Thanks for the loan. It's been a pleasure to exhibit a drum that was actually used here at Valley Forge, said his companion. Mr. Owens seemed to get a little taller. Oh, yes, my ancestor was right here, starving and freezing with the rest of the army. He also warned Washington at Brandywine, you know. Pat nudged me. Gosh, Eddie was right. I thought that was just one of his tall tales. Shh, I said. I peered back around the arch, then ducked back again out of sight just as Mr. Owens swept by. After he was gone, we went back to where Petunia was calmly munching away with the dry yellow grass within her reach. I didn't know Mr. Owens had a museum, Pat said, making a face. I hope we don't have to go there on a field trip. I couldn't stand Eddie's bragging. He doesn't have one yet, and won't if I can help it, I declared. I suddenly felt exhausted and asked Pat if we could go home. Soon we were clip-clopping back on the pike. Mom told me about the missing will, Pat said sympathetically. I'll help you look for it if you like. Thanks, but we've already looked everywhere. Oh, she said sadly. We went along in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from Petunia as she ambled along. Then in rhythm, with Petunia's gait, Pat started to sing. Come bridle me, my milk-white steed, come bridle me, my pony, that I may ride to fair London town to plead for my Geordie. Geordie? He stammered, interrupting her song.